Today, we will be going over the bent over reverse fly. This exercise focuses primarily on the deltoid muscles, but we will be analyzing which other muscles and joints are being worked in with this exercise. This exercise goes through different phases. During the preparatory phase, there are no movements occurring. The body is neutral and most of the joints remain in anatomical position. During this anatomical position, the arms are supposed to be on each side of the body with the palms facing forward. Instead, the radial ulnar joint is at mid position between pronation and supination. The radial ulnar joint is a pivot joint, meaning its axis of rotation is the vertical axis along the transverse plane. The muscles working to maintain this position are the pronator teres and the pronator quadratus as the agonist and the supinator and brachioradialis as a synergist. The line of pull for the radial ulnar joint muscles is anterior to the long axis. During this phase, the fingers are also not in anatomical position. The fingers are being flexed in order to grip the dumbbell. The fingers are flexed at the MCP, PIP, and DIP joints while the thumb is supposed at the CMC joint and flexed at the MCP and IP joint. MCP joints are considered to be condyloid joints because they are able to flex, extend, adduct, as well as abduct. The PIP and the DIP joints are considered to be ginglymus joints because they are only able to flex and extend. These joints will remain the same way throughout the whole exercise in order to be able to hold the dumbbells. The muscles that are working as the flexion and opposition of the fingers are the flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus. The antagonist consists of the extensor digitorum, extensor indicis, extensor digitum minimi, extensor pollicis longus, extensor pollicis brevis, and abductor pollicis longus. These muscles act together in order to maintain this neutral position. The line of pull for the finger is anterior superior to the sagittal axis. The scapula is also partially depressed due to the dumbbells acting upon them, bringing down the scapula. The first phase, the bending over phase. During this phase, there is flexion and anterior pelvic rotation of the pelvis with the spinal column staying straight. There is also hip flexion in the hip joint. Upward rotation of the shoulder girdle is also involved when the arms begin to hang straight down in this position. The radial ulnar joints and fingers stay the same from starting phase. The knee joints are slightly flexed with a very slight dorsiflexion of the ankle. The agonist muscles working here during pelvic rotation and hip flexion are the iliacis, soleus major and minor, rectus femoris, and the tensor fascia latae. The synergist muscles in this movement are the adductor brevis, adductor longus, and gracilis. The line of pull of these muscles is anterior to the frontal axis. The knee joint, or the tibiofemoral joint, has slight flexion. The main muscles in this movement are the semitendinous, semimembranous, the bicep femoris, and the popliteus. The muscles helping are the gracilis and the sartorius. Line of pull is anterior to the frontal axis. The ankle joint, or the talocrural joint, has a very light dorsiflexion during a closed chain movement. The main muscles are the peroneus tertius, extensor digitorum longus, extensor hallucis longus, and tibialis anterior. The synergist muscles are the gastrocnemius and soleus. The line of pull is anterior to the frontal axis. The second phase, when the arm raises. During this phase, the arms are being abducted horizontally in the glenohumeral joint. The scapula, which is the stabilizing joint for this movement, is being adducted and downwardly rotated. Flexion and anterior pelvic rotation of the pelvis while keeping the spinal column straight are still occurring during this phase. Hip flexion of the hip joint, the radial ulnar joint, and the fingers remain the same as they were in the preparation phase, as well as the knee joint slightly flexed with a slight dorsiflexion of the ankle. The scapula acts as the stabilizer joint. It performs adduction and downward rotation with the rhomboids being the agonist, while the middle and lower trapezius, levator scapulae, and pectoralis major are the synergist. The main joint in this movement is the glenohumeral joint, which is acting in a concentric contraction. Horizontal abduction occurs within the middle and posterior deltoid fibers, latissimus dorsi, teres minor, and infraspinatus being the agonist muscles, while they are being stabilized by the rotator cuffs. The line of pull of these muscles is posterior to the sagittal axis. The pelvis, hip joint, radial ulnar joint, finger joints, knee joint, and the ankle joint remain the same while this movement is occurring. The third phase is the lowering of the arms. During this phase, the glenohumeral joint is being horizontally adducted. The scapula is being abducted and slight upward rotation occurs as well. Flexion and anterior pelvic rotation of the pelvis while keeping the spinal column straight are still occurring during this phase. Hip flexion of the hip joint, the radial ulnar joint, and the fingers remain the same as they were in the preparation phase, as well as the knee joint slightly flexed with a slight dorsiflexion of the ankle. The muscles working during this phase are the same as the ones working during the previous phase. The biggest difference is that during this phase, these muscles are working in eccentric contraction as they are going down, giving into gravity. The scapula still acts as a stabilizer joint that is now abducting because it's pulling away from the body's midline. Slight upward rotation is also seen in this movement. The agonist muscles are the rhomboids, while the synergist muscles are the middle and lower trapezius, levator scapulae, and the pectoralis minor. The main joint in this movement is once again the glenohumeral joint. It is now performing horizontal adduction, which is done by the middle and posterior deltoid fibers, latissimus dorsi, teres minor, and the infraspinatus. The rotator cuffs are the synergists. The line of pull of these muscles still remain posterior to the sagittal axis. The other joints that remain unmoved are the same as the ones in the previous phase as the movement is performed by those. They include the pelvis hip joint, which still involves anterior pelvic rotation and flexion, the radial ulnar joint, finger joints, the knee joint, and the ankle joint. The fourth phase, which is back to the starting phase. During this phase, there is extension and posterior pelvic rotation of the pelvis with the spinal column staying straight. There is also hip extension of the hip joint. Downward rotation of the shoulder girdle is now involved when the arms begin to go towards the anatomical position. The radial ulnar joint and fingers stay the same from the starting phase. The knee joints are slightly flexed with very slight dorsiflexion of the ankle. The agonist muscles during pelvic rotation and hip extension are the iliacis, soleus major and minor, rectus femoris, and the tensor fasciae latae, which are now working concentrically. The muscles helping this movement is the adductor brevis, adductor longus, and gracilis. The line of pull of these muscles is anterior to the frontal axis. The knee joint or tibofemoral joint has slight extension. The main muscles in this movement are the semitendinosus, semimembranosus, biceps and popliteus working concentrically. The muscles helping are the gracilis and the sartorius. The line of pull of these muscles is anterior to the frontal axis. The first stretch that can be done to improve this exercise is the upward facing dog pose, which not only stretches the abdomen, shoulder, lungs, and chest, but it also strengthens the arms, wrist, and the vertebral column. The second stretch is the child's pose. This stretch is really good to stretch and strengthen the ankle, thigh, and the hip muscles. The last stretch is the overhead arm pull, which develops the flexibility of the arms, shoulders, and the trunk muscles when tilting to the side as well. The first exercise that can be done is the back extensions, which are very good at strengthening the erector spinae and the spinae extensors. The second exercise is the overhead press, which its main focus is the anterior and middle deltoids as well as the triceps. The third exercise are dips. These are very good for strengthening the triceps as well as the pectoralis major and minor and the anterior deltoids.